Hello. Um, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Before I forget, before I run out of time, just want to do a big shout out to all the other Moving Castles members that inspired a lot of this talk. So big shout out to Manus, Agnes, Rasmus, and Arthur. Really honored to work with them. But I always not leave enough time to thank them. So, want to do it at the beginning. So I want to start with this statement. I think that last year was a lot about working on the infrastructure of autonomous worlds and on-chain games. And I think that if this infrastructure is what will bring new and thinkable worlds to life, now is the moment to tell the stories that will keep this world alive. And so I'm going to talk about stories, storytelling, and narrative. I will unfortunately not I'm not able to describe it as good as Jay, so I will kind of like use them interchangeably, but the topic is that one. So let's start with a bit of like how I think storytelling works in different type of games. Is single player games mostly allowed for a type of linear storytelling in which players go from A to B, and they might go like these or they might like go like that, but it's they start at the beginning and they eventually finish at the end, and the end will always be a point that developers accounted for. MMOs, on the other hand, had to account for the widespread player interaction, and therefore they kind of had to lose this linearity in the stories they were telling, and the players. Another way that I use a story here is like a player's journey kind of emerged as a community, became a community journey in a sense. However, the player is still kind of like a child that is placed in this gigantic sandbox built by this all-powerful demiurge and has no access to tools that would change the story of the world itself. Also, I love single-player games. I love FMOs, so I don't want to shit on them, but there is an infrastructural limitation for sure. On-chain games and autonomous worlds kind of promise us that they will break this barrier and that they will give players a set of tools as powerful as the ones of the original authors have. And by doing so, they will allow players not only to affect how their own stories evolve, not only to affect how the story of their community or their civilization evolves, but how the story of the world itself evolves. I'm alternating black and white screen, so I wake you up every time. But it is a bit intense, I realize. I like this quote by Peter Pan. The more autonomous a world is, the more the win condition is user-defined, and the more win conditions can be user-defined, the more autonomy the world has. I love it so much that I made my own version. The more autonomous a world is, the less purpose it has. I think, like talking about the end, I think like the purpose is a sort of end to playing the game. I think autonomous world perhaps don't have an end. Many people made this point. The more we soften a world's diegetic boundaries and let the players in the driver's seat, the more these journeys that they live lose a predefined structure made of beginnings, middles, and ends in favor of open and endless formats in which the process itself of fabricating a story becomes much more important than the outcome. There's another quote that I love from Steven Spielberg. I think he didn't understood anything, so I love to use it against him. People have forgotten how to tell a story. Stories don't have a middle or an end anymore. They usually have a beginning that never stops beginning. Like, I love the fact that he just cannot. It's like his grandchild kind of showed him TikTok, and it was like, oh, but TikTok doesn't have a beginning and an end, But I love to use this because perhaps the process, our process of learning what an autonomous world is, maybe it is a process of forgetting. After all, it is a process of forgetting how we used to tell these stories and finding new ways of telling them, and also like learning how to do so collectively again. So I think that this kind of process of unlearning, it's something that we went through in Moving Castle when we had to like understand how do you actually design, like we both had to learn to be game designers first, and then once we had to learn to be game designer, we still did not learn, but you know, we also had to like adapt to a new mentality, I think. So today, maybe I don't really have definition, but I just want to kind of like outline some concepts that we use the Moving Castles, or at least, you know, I use a Moving Castle, but I think they're shared, which are Squish maxing, word prompting, and narrative engine. These are not tight definitions, but, you know, I think they are evocative. So let's start with the first one, Squish maxing, and let's start in 1997 AD. It is somewhere before September 1997. I'm gonna tell a fact about Ultima Online, and I know I was told that there's some OG Ultima Online devs in the audience. So if I got something wrong, I had to reconstruct this from Reddit posts. So if I got something wrong, hold your tomatoes. You can throw them to me later. But I would be happy to actually discuss some details if you have time. So it's 1997, and Ultima Online, which is one of the first, in my opinion, one of the best sandbox MMO ever made, released their beta. Not public yet, they released their beta. And the Ultima Online team spent over 3 years and an enormous amount of budget, apparently, building a masterpiece artificial life engine that would allow ecological events in the game to affect animal behavior. So what this means is basically there was this perfectly balanced ecosystem or ecology where you would have like grass growing, and then you would have herbivores roaming around eating the grass and therefore like feeding themselves, breed and multiply. And then you would have carnivores, and the carnivores would eat the herbivores, you know, and then, you know, they would leave space for the grass to grow back, and so on and so forth. You get the point. And the players in their start, they were supposed to kill the carnivores because, you know, you get more rewards, you can progress in the game before you can actually go and fight like more monsters, or, you know, before you actually start your journey. So in 1997, they released the public beta. They think their game is ready. They gently hold this world, and they give it to the player, and the player squish. These are some I found some on the Ultima Online Reddit, some people, and I asked them, well, do you remember this ecology? What happened? And I was like, all I remember in the beta, I spent most of my days roaming around and punching birds to death. Another guy, I killed and massacred anything and everything that moved. I had no idea there was an ecology system. I just kill shit to level up. So this is actually a quote from Richard Garriott himself that described that amazing, incredible day. Players ran over the world like a swarm of ants that consumed every living thing as fast as it was possible to spawn it. They killed every single creature, so as soon as a deer or a rabbit or a wolf showed up on the map, the nearest person to it killed it, skinned it, took its meat, and took its hide instantaneously. So I think it's quite interesting because we have these two things. Like the devs wanted to create this narrative of like peaceful and like just like coexistence of this ecology with like the players and the animals and the monsters, and the players just wanted this like hellish landscape of like murder and like species and like grinding addiction. So it was a disaster. The devs realized, okay, we might have a problem here, and they had to fix it. So as I said before, the player's action in this type of MMOs, they can't have consequences on this world's future. This is because the author has to predict a certain future for this world already, and on that prediction, he based the whole game progression. He as the Ultima Online team. When the player like squished this virtual ecology, they created an apocalyptic event that forked the world's timeline. Now, prediction here is the keyword. This is a quote from Federico Campagna book that I really, really recommend, called Prophetic Culture. Prediction from predicere, to speak in advance, as an interior design of a world's future can flourish only as long as the song of the world keeps flowing from the voice of a certain narrator. Now, the Squish, I think it's an interesting concept because it is a sort of moment where the story of this world started being sung by the players. Yeah, sometimes players don't know what they're doing, but still they are sang another song. But the infrastructure, I mean, also it's 1997, I think the Ultima Online team did enough, but, infrastructurally, this would not be allowed in a type of world like that. So eventually the dev, to save the worlds, they kind of had to like strip all the code and just like start spawning rabbits. It's like the, money printing machine go brr, but with like rabbits. And even there, they couldn't keep up with the spawn, so they had to invent something called server sharding that, would divide players in different server, and then each server would be able to spawn enough animals. This is my understanding of it, at least. I've always been curious, though. I don't know what slides I'm at. Yeah. I've always been curious, though. That's actually kind of was my entry point 2 years ago into Autonomous Worlds. Like, what would happen if we could develop worlds in which they would account for this Squish, that would account for like this possibility of just allowing players to sing the song of the world themselves. I think that's what Autonomous Worlds are about, honestly. What kind of design process do we have to develop to account for this? So there is another guy I really, really like. It's Hidetaka Miyazaki, the creator of presidents now from Software, creator of Dark Souls. I have this quote. I couldn't find a picture of it, but I have this quote at Moving Castle behind my desk, like attached on a wall. I think it's another great quote. He approached storytelling like this. He's like, what story? I just make some random shit up and let those idiots do the rest. This is another Reddit thing. Obviously, he probably never said that, but I really wish he would. I just think that actually, unironically, this might the right mentality to develop an Autonomous Worlds. Just leave space to the players to create that's something, to do the rest. So what does this model look like? What does this like storytelling model look like? I'm gonna do another little flashback. It's somewhere around 400 BC. I also obviously not have too many information about the exact date, but it's an anecdote that is also in the Federico Campagna's book, and it's a story told by a medieval monk called Albericus Triumphantium in his book Chronicon. The story goes more or less like this. It's the eve, of course, this is also a historical representation of the character I'm talking to you about. It's the eve of a great battle, a great Roman battle, and one soldier, afraid of what might happen to him the day after, goes to visit the Sibylla. The Sibyls were female prophet in ancient Greece and ancient Rome that people would visit to know their future of the future of their inner world, if you will. So this is the Sibylla. So the warrior stands in front of the Sibylla and asks, "Will I return from the battlefield tomorrow?" And the Sibylla replies in this perfectly paced, like without intonation, in Latin, "Ibis redibis non morieris in bello." Of course, I should have said it in another way, but you get the point. The translation of it, I will not read it. I will let you read it. Now, quoting again Federico Campagna, in this sentence, obviously, you can, there is an omission of something. In her case, Federico Campagna says there is a omission of literally nothing. She omitted a pause, and because she omits that pause, she kind of forks two futures. she forks a future in which you will go, you will return not, in the war you will perish, and the future of you will go, you will return, not in the world you will perish. In a sense, by omitting the post, she allows the players to fill that gap himself. And depending how the warrior will interpret and unlock this prophecy and interact with it, then he will be able to unlock two different stories. So again, it's like, story, what story? I just make some random shit up. Let those idiots do the rest. So we saw that the predictor in the MMO in the Ultima Online example, the predictor speaks with extreme certainty about a world's future because he knows no one can tamper with his plan. When players try to push a different narrative, the world is patched to discard their vision, not because of like malign intents, but because of infrastructural problems, limitations. However, a prophecy has a different narrative structure. Prophetic means to speak in front, not to speak in advance. And to speak in front means to speak from the position of end time, to speak of the position of the end of the world. Basically, to account for the squish. You know that after you utter your prophecy, the world will not be the same. You will die and another one kind of will spawn. Although still making still being part of the same. So the prophet understands narrative as a puzzle made of segment upon segments, a composable narrative, which is not prescripted, is that not exist a priori before it's made, but it only emerges when we interact with it. So this would be the second concept that we use, which is the concept of world prompting. I'm sorry, but I will have to quote Lut again here because I think it's just a very good example of world prompting. I mean, if you think about it, it is kind of like the perfect writing prompt. It's also a very great narrative device. And I think it also shows us two things that are missing in the world prompting concept, at least I think. The first one is that loot by itself does anything. It's a narrative device that requires a lot of work from the people interacting with it to actually build a world. A narrative device, the narrative device of loot doesn't move the story forward by itself. It doesn't have a sort of like ripple effect that connects in this kind of like the loot ecosystem, apart, of course, from the speculative financial aspect of it. Once you prompt a world, another aspect is that I could have made a better graph, but I didn't have time. It like loot, and I think like Love pointed this out, like, I mean, it's a good thing, of course, but loot spawn a lot of projects, which is very exciting. I think our interest at Moving Castle is also like, how do you make all these worlds talk to each other? How do you create these ripple effects that have chain consequences between all the players and between all the instances of this world? So how do you make sure that once a world is spawned, players will nurture it, and how do you create this emotional drive? And so I will make yet another flashback. It's November 28, 2003, and Light Kira Yagami picks up the Death Note. I don't know if there's any Death Note fans here, but I hope so. So yeah, I will sum it up real quickly. So Death Note is a manga and anime series in which a high school student called Light Yagami, and later nicknamed Kira, finds a mysterious black notebook that can end anyone's life as long as the writer knows both the target's true name and a face. So Kira begins experiment with the power of this notebook using some criminals he sees on TV. He turns on the news channel, he sees a criminal face, he reads their names on the screen, then writes the name on the notebook. Within a certain amount of time, the criminal dies live on national TV. So what notebook works, and Kira has now acquired an immense power to change the world in his own image. He has unlocked a new mechanic. I really actually I found this kind of randomly yesterday, but I really like I'm going to make the whole world know I'm here. I think that's it's a very powerful feeling to use in autonomous world. It's like, give the player the feeling that they can let know other players that they're here. So eventually, though, this wave of murders raises suspicions of a young detective called L, who starts investigating the case, and with a clever trick narrows down Kira's location to be with the Kanto region of Japan. Furious, Kira vows to kill L, and from then on, I don't want to spoil, but from then on, the series focuses around the psychological and sometimes physical battle between these two characters. Now, of course, Death Note follows the infrastructural limitation of traditional rendered media. However, if we immerse ourselves in the edges of the series and imagine Kira and L to be players within this game world, I think we have a very good blueprint of how narrative engines could look like. I don't know if I said this, maybe I skipped, but yeah, if loot is a narrative device, I think like a narrative engine is able to create this connection that I was talking about. I think there's actually already a very good example of these in like onchain games, which is what happened in Dark Forest. You know, the DFDAO and Orden GG had this like big fight in, I think, one of the last seasons, in 0.6.5, that it was exactly about this. You know, it was like somebody brought a Death Note in the world. You know, they just unlocked a new type of prophecy for this world, and then the other players, because they did that, the other players had to inevitably adapt. So they immediately, you know, it's the narrative engine of the new mechanic brought in by one of the two teams created this ripple effect between all the other players, and the other players had to adapt and bring in new tools to counter that. So I think this is a way that a narrative engine can push the story forward by itself just once it's interacted with it. Very similarly to the notebook in Death Note, that has a series of, you know, I would say kind of like very tight digital physics, and like Ludens also said this in a talk a couple of years or like a year ago. It's a very tight set of digital physics. And I am seeing that the next slide, it's the old slide that has not been updated somehow. But yeah, on the left, imagine that on the left there is a world before the Squish. And then there's the Death Note, which is like this narrative engine that once interacted with it, start kind of like creating all these possible worlds future. And on the right, every dot is sort of like a narrative engine that pushes the story forward, and then also kind of like creates a lot of possible futures. So I don't have an ending to this talk, but I've also been talking about how stories have no ends anymore, so maybe I can get away with it. So I just want to like kind of like sum up or try to find a definition for these terms. And, you know, I'm happy if anybody has better definition to hang out and chat. Squish maxing, a liberating force from centralized prediction-based story structure. Word prompting, a framework for the design of composable narratives with endless futures. And the narrative engine, an asset/mechanic, or I think like a narrative engine, you could also see it like, what if loot, instead of like game asset, like a sword, would have like a mechanic, like you can kill one player a day, right? I don't know, maybe that's a good way of saying it. An asset mechanic that causes a web of chain reactions at a world scale. So I butchered that perfect quote, and maybe we can now think about it as a story. What story? I just prompt a world, put a narrative engine inside of it, and let those idiots squish the rest. If I have minutes, yeah, then I will 3 minutes, perfect. Yeah, I will just tell you the next part of the prophecy story that I omitted. So the soldier just heard the prophecy and, you know, kind of depressed and goes back to camp because he doesn't know what's going to happen after all. But on the way to the camp, he also kind of give up to this attitude of having to understand what will happen next. So he goes to camp, it's night, he takes his shield and his big sword, or maybe he had a smaller knife, and he starts carving a motto, a phrase on his shield. And this phrase is Nexpe Nekmetu, which is without hope and without fear. And, I think it's a bit cheesy, but I kind of think it's a very nice attitude to develop autonomous world with, without the hope that the players will think the way you think, and without fear that their thinking will generate interesting stories. So that's it. I think I still have the question for the post-assembly. So I found this picture from the Moving Castles headquarters. We do this not because it is easy, but because we thought it would be easy. So my question would be actually more of a prompt, perhaps. I do this not because it's easy, but because. Thank you.